as we come to the next speaker is James Paspaley from Australia. Here's your pointer. Yeah.
Okay, firstly I'll have to apologise in advance for the pace at which I'm going to have to deliver this speech because I'm told 20 minutes sharp in Swiss, so I don't know whether their timing's on American one. One of the first things I've noticed in this discussion, and since Laurent's been talking with us at Paspaley, is how, on one hand, how little the world knows about what we in Australia have done and what we do today, and then as a result, how poorly we've done as an organisation, as a trade, to educate the world about our history and what we even do today. So my discussion today, my talk, really tries to touch a little bit on everything largely, the history of the Australian industry and its regulations. So I'll leap into it because it's not one going to get it done in 10 minutes, but Gaetano, I think you set a good benchmark, so thank you. Okay, in the time before agriculture technology, the world experienced major problems with our natural marine resources. These problems were initially caused by overexploitation or overfishing, but as nations developed their industrial technologies, pollution also played a major role in destroying our natural marine resources. These were devastating problems because they led to the extinction of some of our natural resources. It was these problems that led to the development of agricultural technology. This was man's endeavour to produce the products we loved, which nature could no longer produce in the abundance that we require. Agriculture, like other emerging industries, started with problems. It has not been uncommon for new agricultural industries to overproduce, which has usually led to pollution of the environment that the agriculture depends on. Many agricultural projects have failed due to these problems, for example, corn farming in Taiwan. Similarly, we have seen pearl industries in the verge of collapse because of these sorts of issues. In Japan, we saw the destruction of the Japanese natural aquatic pearl oyster due to hatchery-produced hybrid pearl oysters. In fact, all pearl culture industries have suffered at some time or other from overproduction.
That's going to be easier.
Thank you. There is no doubt that these early problems have adversely affected the quality of products of all agricultural industries. This has often led to a perception that the farm product is inferior to the natural product. But like all developing industries, the agriculture industry must learn from its mistakes. The fact is, agriculture technology is one of the world's fastest growing and most important industries. It is the only solution for man to produce those things that mankind loves, that nature can no longer produce in the quantity that we desire. We have learned that agriculture is not only feasible if we want to have the natural pristine environment that once produced, is only feasible if we have the natural pristine environment that once produced the natural products for us. We've learned that the amount that we can produce through agriculture has also limitations. These limitations are imposed by the nature that we operate in. By agriculture should never be primarily about production of quantity. Surely the objective for agriculture must be to produce the same quality or better than was produced in the wild. We now know that this is only possible if we preserve our natural environment. The pursuit of cultured pearls of equal quality to natural pearls is the hallmark of the Australian pearl industry. This is not an easy task. It requires rigorous commitment to protect the environment. This requires the utmost dedication to the culturing process, a process requiring experience, skill, dedication and enormous investment. However, the reward is a pearl just as beautiful in its natural state as the finest of natural pearls ever produced. This must be the ultimate objective of every agriculture industry, and once this objective has been achieved, the product should be treasured with the same reverence that the wild product was once treasured. The Australian pearl industry is unique in its use of primarily wild-caught pintard maximum, an oyster endemic to Outer Mile Beach in the remote and beautiful northwest coast of Western Australia. This is the last place this species is found in commercial commercially viable quantities in the wild.
Yeah, the green one.
Green one. 80 mile beach, right. It's an interesting notion to me that I regularly have discussions with oil and gas industries coming to do seismic survey, and we sit down every time, 11th hour, and say, oh, we just have to tell you, this little patch of beach here is the last place on earth that this oyster lives in abundance. And no one knows. So, welcome to part of the smartest people in the world who know where this oyster actually lives. Ours is a colourful industry, steeped in history. And the fishery is one of Australia's oldest. Over time, it has developed into an industry with sustainability as its primary focus. Sustainability has broad application. As only the commercially viable wild stock of pearl oysters in the world, we have a responsibility to ensure that it is responsibly managed. The strict management of the wild stock of pearl oysters is based on decades of rigorous scientific study and modelling, and it is critical to our industry. It is the very basis of our pearling business, and we regard ourselves as the custodians of this natural resource. The successful production of pearls is directly related to the area in which we operate. This means that for Paspaley, sustainability also includes the preservation of our pearl farming environment. Our pearl farming locations lie over 1,500 miles of the remote and pristine Kimberley region of Western Australia. It is dramatic, relatively undisturbed landscapes, include thousands of islands lying off the red sandstone coast, incredible biodiversity, and Australia's largest inshore coral reefs. Governments in Australia are currently in the process of implementing the world's largest system of marine protected networks, which will include much of the Kimberley region. Our activities, both shell catching and farming, will be completely encompassed within these boundaries. The West Kimberley is also on the National Heritage List, with 19 million hectares declared environmentally and culturally significant to the nation. Interestingly, one of the culturally significant aspects listed is the region's pearling heritage. Furthermore, a large area, including our oldest pearl farming site, was recently designated as a sanctuary for southern right and humpback whales. Pearling activities have been assessed as the only commercial fishery compatible with these environmental priorities, which is a fantastic endorsement of the environmentally responsible way in which we conduct our pearling operations. This is not a lucky coincidence, rather it's the result of decades of engagement with governments, government departments, industry groups, environmentalists, special interest groups, research organisations and the community at large. Don't ask for legislation because this is what you end up with. It is no longer acceptable to simply do the right thing. Today we must defend our industry and others like it by educating and engaging with the public at large to maintain our social licence to operate. To explain the ongoing focus of sustainability by Paspaley and the Australian industry as a whole, it is useful to go back to the beginning and touch on the history of the fishery and its evolution to its now prominent position in sustainable fisheries and environmental management. Australia's pearling industry originated around Shark Bay in Western Australia in 1850, based on the Pintado albina pearl oyster. At that time, the fishery, like most fisheries, was unregulated and the fishery was decimated. Within, I think it was 2 decades, the shell stocks were entirely wiped out and the fishery collapsed. This was the first time that independent studies were conducted in the Australian industry and resulted in the first act, which was the Shark Bay Pearl Fishery Act of 1892. It also induced the pearling fleet to move northwards past Cossack in search of new fishing grounds, where they eventually encountered the 80 Mile Beach, 100 miles south of Broome, with abundant stocks of Pintado maxim. Long prior to the discovery of these fishing grounds by the pearling fleet, maximum oysters from this area had been used by local indigenous people for ceremonial purposes and for the trade with inland groups and their regional neighbours. The pearl oyster industry of the late 19th century and first half of the 20th century, primarily for sale as mother of pearl and natural pearls. And yeah, you can see. Sorry, we don't sell any pearl shell here. Hard hat divers operating from wooden luggers collected the oysters in great peril from depths ranging from 10 metres to almost 100 metres. At its peak, the 80-mile beach and the Broome area supplied 75% of the world's production of mother of pearl, with some 400 vessels taking up to 2,000 tonnes, or approximately 2 million oysters per annum. Some 3,500 people were employed in the fishery, and the industry was crucial to the commerce and development of Northern Australia. By 1910, Broome had become one of the most important pearling centres in the world. These pearling grounds were also the source of many of the most important natural pearls ever discovered. To this day, the Kimberley continues to hold a special place in the minds of Australians for the region's colourful pearling history. In fisheries management terms, the fishery was entirely extractive. There was a race for fish mentality and a command and control style of management. The real extent of government influence amounted to closing the fishery when stock depletion threatened the industry. There were a number of self-limiting factors that would assist in preserving the wild stock. However, one of the key factors was in the significant reduction in demand for mother of pearl due to the emergence of plastics around the time of World War II, and the acceptance of plastics by consumers as a cheaper alternative to mother of pearl to manufacture articles such as buttons. This crash may well have saved the fishery, as it's unlikely, in my opinion, that the fishery could have sustained 2,000 tonnes per annum on a long-term basis. In the 1940s to the 1970s, the demand and subsequently the fishing for mother of pearl drastically declined, and the industry all but disappeared. For most of the 1960s, there were only a dozen boats taking 200 to 300 tonnes. It was within this landscape that innovation came into play and dramatic change in direction emerged. The culture of pearls would become the primary focus of the new Australian pearling industry. Prior to 1949, culturing pearls was prohibited in Australia by legislative decree. Following the war, due to the poor state of the fishery and the industry, most pearls chose to leave. A small group of industry participants, including my grandfather, Nicholas Paspaley Sr., Sam Mail of Pearls Proprietary Limited, and a handful of others, successfully lobbied the Australian government to have the prohibition against culturing pearls repealed. These pioneers formed two groups determined to establish cultured pearl farms. Pearls Proprietary Limited, comprised of a partnership between Mail, Kuribayashi and Gerdau, established a farm in Western Australia, and Paspaley in the Northern Territory with an associate of the Nippo Pearling Company of Japan. PPL, Australia's first pearl farm, was established in 1956 at Kuri Bay, with Paspaley's farm at Knocker Bay a short time later. The following 2 decades were a period of challenges and innovation, and as traditional Japanese pearl farming techniques were gradually adapted to Australian conditions and the idiosyncrasies of Pintado Maxima Oyster. The Western Australian Partnership, with its access to superior shell of 80-mile beach, had some early successes while Paspaley struggled due to low numbers of suitable shell in territory waters. When my father, also Nick Paspaley, joined the business in 1969, looks just like that now. The company had regularly experienced mortality events over 70%. And this is actually Dad going to see in 69 on one of 2 vessels we had, which was the White Star. When Dad joined the business in 69, the industry was regularly experiencing mortality events of over 70%, and the industry was barely viable. He quickly realised that the systems and processes generally adopted were for the most part working against the animal and nature. He realised that every stage of the process had to be radically amended to ensure the process worked with nature and not against it. This brief summary is a grotesque simplification of what amounted to decades of innovation and investment. However, the full explanation is a speech on its own, and Laurent has told me 15 minutes. Other producers soon copied our processes, and the Australian industry began to produce pearls of a quality and volume that had never been seen before. And most critically, the unsustainably high mortalities of the 60s and 70s became history. As a result of these successes, the 70s and 80s saw the establishment of many new pearling operations, and the demand for pearl oysters again increased dramatically. During this time, the adoption of new hooker diving systems in favour of the less movable hard hat diving suits also allowed oysters to be caught far more efficiently and safely. This created a sort of gold rush amongst pearlers, and the rapidly expanding pearling fleet was soon competing to catch smaller live oysters for pearl culture, as well as large oysters from mother of pearl and natural pearls. This situation only continued for a couple of years until diving catches of both mother of pearl and live pearl oysters plummeted. The drop in live pearl oyster catch rates, together with increased target of live pearl oysters in the new companies entering, soon threatened the viability of all cultured pearling activities in Australia. Thankfully, the industry quickly realised that something had to be done collectively, and the industry engaged with government to create a structure that would allow the industry to operate on a sustainable basis. Some of the first steps towards creating sustainable fisheries were introducing restrictions on the total number of licences and the first prohibition against the taking of pearl oysters for mother of pearl in order to preserve pearl oyster stocks for pearl culture. In 1986, it was agreed the prime use of pearl oysters should be for pearl culture, and that appropriate measures were required to ensure the survival of the industry. From the 1980s onwards, a formal policy was gradually adopted aimed at phasing out fishing pearl oysters from mother of pearl. An informal and somewhat ad hoc regulatory regime focusing on sustainability began to emerge. In what would be a watershed for our fishery, a review committee was appointed in 1987 and subsequently concluded in their report that the use of pearl oysters for culturing pearl was clearly recognised as the primary economic use of the oyster, and all resource management measures should reflect this. It also heralded the partnership approach between government and industry to determine the best practice management measures for the fishery. A Pearling Industry Advisory Committee was established as the conduit between the industry participants and the government, and the pearling industry formed the Pearl Producers Association to encourage open and frank discussion amongst industry members on issues that affect all participants. The modern Pinctada maxima industry in Western Australia emerged a vertically integrated industry with three main components: capture of oysters from the wild, the production of hatchery-breeding pearl oysters, and the seeding of oysters in grow-out and pearl farm releases to produce pearls. What developed in subsequent years was a formal management system where sustainability was enshrined as the primary objective. Some of the key facets of the current legislative, regulatory and management regime in this regard are catch regulation, regulation of farming sites, biological threat mitigation and industry measures. Catch regulation, the Pearling Act was legislated in 1990. This is a little technical, but there are some technophiles amongst us who are very interested in this sort of thing. The Pearling Act was legislated in 1990. It was a major overhaul of regulations associated with the pearling industry. The Act provides for a regulatory framework for the cultivation of pearl oysters and entrenches the maintenance of biological sustainability as the overall objective of pearling legislation. A new Act will soon be introduced which takes further steps in the direction of environmental sustainability. Licences to fish for Pinctada maxima have been capped at a total of 16. New entrants must purchase an existing licence to participate in the industry. Quota was introduced in 1992 with a minimum size and a total allowable catch, determined annually by a stock assessment working group utilising methodology successfully tested over many decades, monitoring catch and effort data against the allocated quota to ensure the integrity of the management strategy. Every year, catch and effort data from 60,000 individual dives made during the season is provided to the Department of Fisheries. From these detailed diver logbooks, records at sea sampling of catches and information gathered during research projects, the status of the stock is reviewed and catch quotas are set for the following season. The fishery is very selective. The oysters are hand collected by divers, resulting in no wasteful catch, no impact to the seabed, and the oysters are assessed for suitability by each ship's captain, with oysters smaller than minimum size and large breeding oysters immediately returned to the ocean. The quota management system allows wild oyster quota to be transferred between participants and licence holders through assignment of specific individual company catch quotas and various fishery zones. The amount of pearling lease area that may be held by any individual company is also regulated and determined using a formula based on that company's quota. This ensures that pearling operations do not hold significantly more lease area than required for their pearling operations. Importantly, the lease application process requires an environmental impact assessment, as well as strict performance criteria to ensure that leases are issued and then utilised. Pearling leases make up a tiny percentage of the total area of coastal waters inshore of the 20-metre depth contour in Western Australia and the Northern Territory border. Even though pearling consumes a tiny percentage of the Western Australian coastline, pearling leases are issued exclusive only to other pearl farmers, meaning that all other users are able to access, traverse and enjoy areas where pearl farms exist. 2 minutes. Pearl Oyster Translocation Protocol outlines regulatory requirements including health sampling procedures, certification approvals required to move any pearl oysters within and between zones of Western Australia. Pearl farm leases are prohibited within the 80-mile beach wild oyster resource. Pearl oysters are highly sensitive to water quality, which leads to mortalities and reduced pearl size and quality. So consequently, preferred locations for pearl farms are generally remote and well away from polluted water sources. I'm down to 10 minutes, I'm going to skip through some of these. The industry has invested heavily in research and development to adapt pearl farming practices to the environment, and we regularly conduct audits and research on our environmental performance. Recent research shows that farms which have been in constant pearl production for over 50 years indicate no measurable change in the bedding costs. Oysters generally reseed a number of times, maximising the use of the natural resource. And at the end of its productive life, the oyster is then harvested for its meat and shell. Pearl culture is perhaps the only aquaculture industry that produces no wastage in either wasted byproduct, wasted catch, or from the necessity to feed the animals a greater quantity of protein than they will ultimately produce. Pearl oysters on pearl farms require only the nourishment they receive from the naturally occurring microorganisms of their habitat. In essence, the fishery is a product of developments over time and by self-imposed and government regulation to achieve sustainability. Sustainability contributes to the health of the fishery, promotes best practice environmental management, and underpins the successful production of pearls. It is this symbiotic relationship that has allowed the pearling industry to continue to operate in what is tantamount to a wilderness environment, which has in turn been recognised by government through the declaration of marine parks in the areas in which we operate. Innovation and capital investment have subsequently flowed from these conditions, and such investment promotes the integrity of the system as there is a vested interest in the optimal environmental landscape and the fishery remains sustainable. Paspaley's journey over 70 years in this industry has meant that we have seen firsthand the symbiosis between the natural environment and the pearl. Our ethos is that a high quality environment is required to produce high quality pearls, and we therefore regard a high level of self-imposed environmental stewardship as being of critical importance to our operations. To this end, we have invested heavily in research and development and have implemented systems and procedures to protect and maintain the environment in which we operate. For example, all Paspaley farms have procedures for the collection and disposal of waste from shore camps, and all Paspaley support vessels must follow strict company policies on the minimisation and processing of waste materials. We place a strong emphasis on our staff's responsibilities towards the environment, and all of these measures are designed to minimise environmental impacts. In summary, the Australian pearling industry is an industry that is well managed through a number of legislative instruments, but one that has nonetheless been proactively establishing the environmental credentials we have through commissioned investigations and independent third-party evaluation. The overall conclusion is that the pearling industry is environmentally benign. In fact, it could be argued, and it has been argued, that the industry is environmentally beneficial, has an environmentally beneficial effect, as if not for the existence of the pearling industry, there would be far fewer influential advocates for environmental preservation of this remote region. Risk assessment workshops are held regularly, and no significant threats have been found whatsoever. We're now seeking to take further steps to keep pace with the evolving environmental developments and to ensure we keep pace with the public interest in this regard. I've got a whole piece here on the MSC, I'm going to skip that. The Marine Stewardship Council is a partnership between the WWF and Unilever. It is a global organisation working with fisheries, seafood companies, scientists, conservation groups and the public to promote the best environmental choice in wild capture fisheries and seafood. The MSC Fishery Certification Program and Seafood Eco Label recognises and rewards sustainable fishing. At present, more than 16,000 products in 86 countries carry the MSC logo, and there are currently 287 fisheries either certified or in assessment, representing about 9 million tonnes or 15% of the global fisheries production. The program is based on rigorous science-based standard and independent third-party assessment by internationally accredited certification bodies. The MSC standard comprises three core principles against which fisheries performance is measured: the status of the fish stock, the impact of the fishery on the marine ecosystem, and the management of the system overseeing the fishery. The West Australian pearl oyster fishery is currently undergoing this certification process. MSC certification on current information will apply to the whole pearling process in Western Australia, wild capture and grow out. The oyster and the pearl. Once certified, we'll be eligible to carry MSC's distinctive blue eco-label, which provides assurance that our products are fully traceable to a sustainable fishery that has been awarded MSC certification. Because Australia is the only pearling industry utilising a wild stock fishery, it is the only pearling industry that I'm aware of capable of achieving MSC certification. It is the next development in a continuing pursuit to maintain our operations and enhance and convey the sustainable practices recorded within our industry. We are here today to discuss sustainability. From my perspective in our industry, the simplest and first step of sustainability is the preservation of the wild stock and the environment itself. The real difficulty we face today is the sustainability of pearling businesses in an environment where consumers will publicly and politically demand conditions and regulations that are cumbersome and costly to put in place, and then privately refuse to pay a premium to those producers or countries that comply. If we want our industry to set a high moral and social standard, then we must support it at all levels, from the producer, through the trade, through the consumer. While there are still variations in the economic cycle, the industry is now highly organised and geared to maintaining sustainable production on an economically and environmentally sustainable basis. Thank you for your time.